Most people believe leadership is a role, a title, a position in an organizational hierarchy. But if leadership was simply a title, then everyone promoted into authority would lead effectively. And we know that is not what happens. Organizations are full of intelligent leaders with strong resumes, excellent strategic thinking, and yet their teams are exhausted. Their cultures become silent and decision environments slowly collapse. So, the real question is not who has authority. The real question is who can regulate pressure? Because under pressure, leadership stops being a title, it becomes a nervous system function. And most leadership education never teaches this. Today, I want to unpack why. We tend to evaluate leaders through visible outputs: strategy, communication, execution, decision speed. But leadership breakdown rarely begins in those areas. It begins much earlier, inside perception. When pressure increases, the human nervous system changes how we interpret information. Threat detection increases, ambiguity feels dangerous. Dissent begins to feel like resistance, and feedback can feel like a personal attack. This is why leaders sometimes make decisions that are technically correct but psychologically destructive for the organization. The strategy may work, but the human system collapses around it because people do not only respond to authority, they respond to the emotional regulation of the person holding authority. Let's look at the deeper mechanism. Under stress, the brain shifts control away from the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for reasoning and perspective. Instead, the amygdala begins prioritizing threat detection. That means leaders under pressure often experience narrowed perception, increased certainty, reduced tolerance for dissent, which creates a dangerous illusion. The leader feels more confident, but the decision environment becomes less intelligent. Teams respond immediately. When the leader becomes reactive, the room tightens. When the leader becomes calm, the room opens. In leadership psychology, this is called emotional contagion. The nervous system of the leader becomes the nervous system of the room, which means the most powerful leadership capability is not authority, it is regulation. Now, here is the structural problem. Leadership education almost never addresses this. Most leadership programs train leaders in strategy, communication, execution frameworks, all valuable skills. But something critical is missing. They rarely teach leaders how pressure changes perception or how authority alters the feedback environment or how power can distort judgment. So, leaders enter positions of authority with enormous responsibility, but without understanding the internal architecture shaping their decisions. And when pressure increases, They assume the problem is strategic when the real issue may be regulation. This is the leadership education gap. And until we address it, we will keep producing leaders who are strategically capable but psychologically underprepared for power. Leadership is not simply about controlling outcomes, it is about holding complexity without collapsing into control. And that requires something deeper than authority. It requires self regulation, perspective, awareness of how power interacts with perception. So, the next time we evaluate leadership, we might ask a different question. Not, is this leader intelligent? But, can this leader regulate pressure while holding authority? Because when leaders cannot regulate themselves, authority quietly becomes control. And control eventually becomes manipulation. Leadership begins where regulation begins.